Welcome back to the second episode of Let's Talk About War. Today we are going to talk about the most important victories for the Allied countries since the victories at Normandy. This is the Battle of the Bulge. But first, let's talk about the history of the area where it was fought. The Ardennes Forest, earlier in the war, the Germans marched 60,000 men, 41,000 vehicles, and 771 tanks through the forest to launch a massive surprise offensive against the French. The French were not privy to the idea of the German high command being able to get through the rough terrain of the forested areas. Now, this brings us to December 16th, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge has commenced. The Germans launched their last big offensive of the war, attacking out of the heavily forested areas in Luxembourg, Belgium. The point of the offensive was to stop the Allied use of the port at Antwerp in Belgium, and divide the Allied troops so the German army could encircle the Allied forces and force them into a peace treaty. This, unfortunately, was not the case, and the Allies' victory at the Ardennes exhausted the German resources on the Western Front, and caused the Allied march through Belgium and France and Germany much easier than it would have been. The loss at the Battle of the Bulge was a massive setback for the German military. After this offensive, the Germans were strictly on defense of their own country, and were constantly getting pushed back towards the homeland. Another huge issue with this is the shortage of gasoline the German forces were dealing with. The more modern and deadly tanks that the Germans used were unable to stay in the fight due to consuming an immense amount of gasoline. Now, let's talk about the flaws from the Battle of the Bulge, as there are a few from both sides. The first flaw comes before the battle has even begun. German high command recommended against the attack, and many historians believe that the battle was lost before the first bullet was even fired. This idea stemmed from the fact that the German military was wildly overmatched with the firepower and air force of the Allied forces. At this point in the war, the Luftwaffe was wildly outmatched in the sky, and the German tanks were on the retreat, as well as German troops rationing food and having no or low motivation to actually fight. Second flaw also stems from before the attack, but it is believed that the Americans should have seen the attack coming, as the German POWs were trying to trade information for kinder treatment. But instead, the Allied high command, who was blinded from their continuous victories, couldn't accept the fact that the Germans would try to go back on the offensive. Another American error was when Austrian SS commander named Otto Skivorski sent English-speaking Germans behind the Allied lines with captured American uniforms, jeeps, and weaponry. The German soldiers changed small things like row signs, but where they were most successful is creating terror amongst the Allied men. They started rumors that there were Germans posing as Americans in the camps. To combat this, the Americans set up checkpoints and questioned soldiers about baseball and American pop culture. One soldier even famously held General Omar Bradley, one of the most famous generals aside from George Patton of World War II, in custody for saying that Springfield is the capital of Illinois. It indeed is, but the soldier, being an idiot, thought it was Chicago. The last massive flaw was the Germans' distribution of gas to their tank divisions. The Third Reich tanks, the Panzer any model, and the Tiger tank were the flagship of the German army's original advance. The Nazi high command set aside 50 million gallons of gas for the offensive in Ardennes, but none of that gas was able to get to where it needed to go. Then, the depleted German forces changed their plan to go after Allied fuel reserves, but en route, this plan was changed while going on the offensive. This plan was to put a stop to Allies burning hundreds of millions of gallons of gas purely so that the enemy could not replenish its tanks. With all of these flaws, there is one event that happened in this battle that would change the opinion on an entire race of people by the soldiers who fought side by side. At the Battle of the Bulge, the American troops were desegregated, although desegregation wasn't officially made in the Army until 1948. All-black 333rd and 969th Field Artillery units fought with and assisted the men of the 101st Airborne with haste. Later in the war, the 969th Field Artillery Unit was given the Distinguished Unit Citation, given to the most effective units during the war. In the end, there were nearly 180,000 casualties from both sides, with the Allies suffering significantly less at 75,000, with 47,000 of them being wounded troops. The Germans lost 100,000 men at the lowest estimate. The Battle of the Bulge sealed the fate of the German army and the Nazi high command. They retreated with less armored vehicles, a drained army, and what vehicles they had left running on the gas taken from destroyed gas-powered transportation. On the other hand, the Allies take another critical victory that allows the push east to continue and make the trek to Berlin.